Emily Carter stood at the edge of the small coastal town's dock, the salty wind brushing against her face. She looked down at the old wooden boat resting half buried in the sand. Its name, Liberty Dawn, was barely visible under chipped blue paint. To everyone else, it looked like nothing but a pile of junk waiting to rot away. But to Emily, it looked like a chance, maybe her last one. She had always loved the sea. As a child, she used to watch her father fix small fishing boats. He wasn't rich, but he was patient and kind. Boats are like people, Emily, he used to say. They creak, they break, but if you care enough, they'll carry you through the storm. Her father had passed away years ago, and life since then had been a long storm of its own. Now, at 27, Emily had lost her job at the small diner in town. The owner had to close down after tourists stopped coming. She had sold her furniture to pay rent and skipped meals to save what she could. Her savings had shrunk to exactly $1,000, sitting in an envelope tucked deep inside her bag. That money could have paid her rent for one more month. It could have bought her some time. But when she saw that abandoned boat, something inside her stirred. "Are you seriously thinking about buying that thing?" her friend Clara asked when Emily pointed to it. Emily nodded. "It's only $900. The man said he just wants it gone." Clara shook her head. "That thing will never sail again. You should use your money for something smart." But Emily had already decided. Maybe it wasn't smart. Maybe it didn't make sense. But she was tired of watching her dreams slip away. That boat was broken, like her life. But maybe, just maybe, she could fix both. The next morning, she handed over the cash and signed a piece of paper that simply said, "Sold as is." The man shrugged and drove off, leaving Emily alone with her new project. For days, she worked by herself under the hot sun. The wood was soft with rot, the nails rusted. She bought cheap sandpaper, a few brushes, and a small can of paint. Her hands blistered, her back ached, but she didn't stop. When she worked, she forgot her worries. She could imagine the boat shining again, floating proudly on the water, carrying her far away from the noise of failure. Sometimes people from town walked by and laughed softly. "She's wasting her time," they whispered. "That boat's dead." But Emily didn't care. She came early in the morning and stayed till sunset, sleeping in her small rented room near the harbor. At night, she dreamed of the waves rocking beneath her feet and the whisper of the sea calling her name. One afternoon, after nearly a week of scraping and cleaning, Emily stood back and looked at her progress. The hull still had cracks, but the shape of the boat was visible again. She smiled faintly, sweat dripping down her temple. Then a sudden gust of wind made her stumble. The sail she had tried to hang twisted sharply, tangling around the pole. She groaned in frustration, pulling hard to untie it. "Need a hand with that?" The voice startled her. She turned around and saw an older man standing a few feet away. He wore a faded navy cap, an old brown coat, and held a wooden cane. His face was lined with age, but his blue eyes were sharp and calm. "Oh, sure, thank you," Emily said, stepping aside. The man moved slowly but with purpose. He reached up, untangled the rope, and adjusted the sail with surprising skill. "There you go," he said with a small smile. She still got her shape. Emily tilted her head. "You talk like you know boats." "I should," he said quietly. "I used to build them." "Back before everything changed," Emily nodded. "I'm Emily Carter." "Walter Dean," he replied, tipping his cap. Then he looked at the side of the boat, his eyes softening when he read the faint letters. "Liberty Dawn," he whispered. "Well, I'll be—" "You know this boat?" Emily asked. Walter traced the letters with his hand. "Yes. My best friend Jack and I built her when we were young, before the war. We wanted to sail her around the world, but we never got the chance. After I came home, I couldn't find her. I thought she was gone forever." Emily felt a chill. "Then it's your boat," he shook his head. "No, not anymore. She's yours now. I'm just surprised she's still here." Walter looked around the dock, then at her tools scattered on the ground. "You working on her alone?" Emily smiled tiredly. "Yeah, I don't really have much choice." He nodded slowly. "Then maybe you could use a little help. My hands aren't as strong as they used to be, but I remember enough." And just like that, the two began working together. At first, Emily didn't know what to say. Walter was quiet most of the time, humming softly as he sanded or adjusted the rigging. But every now and then, he'd tell a short story. About storms that came out of nowhere, about nights under a sky full of stars, about the sound of a ship cutting through calm waters. Emily listened, enchanted. She learned that Walter had served in the Marines for over 20 years. After returning home, he had lived alone in a small cabin up the hill. His wife had passed away years earlier and he had no children. The sea, he said, was his only friend that had never left him. "You know," he said one evening, sitting beside her on the dock, "I used to think I'd never touch a boat again." "Too many memories. What changed your mind?" Emily asked. He looked at her and smiled. "You did. Watching you work reminded me of what it means to start over." Emily felt her throat tighten. She didn't know why, but his words comforted her more than anything she had heard in months. Over the next few days, they repaired the cracked boards, sealed the leaks, and replaced the old ropes. The smell of fresh paint filled the air. Walter showed Emily how to balance the weight of the hull, how to patch the edges with resin, and how to listen for the creak that told you when the wood was still alive. As they worked, Emily started to notice little things about Walter: the way his hands shook slightly when he picked up a hammer, the faraway look in his eyes when a plane flew overhead, the way he sometimes paused in silence as if remembering something painful, but she never asked. She could tell that whatever haunted him wasn't ready to be spoken aloud. One afternoon, as they took a break under the shade of the pier, Walter looked at the boat and said, "You've done her proud. Emily, she looks better than I ever expected." "She's not done yet," Emily said with a small laugh. "The engine still won't start." Walter nodded. "I might have something that could help. Mind if I bring a few tools tomorrow?" "Of course not," she said. The next morning, Emily arrived early. The sea was calm, the air cool and quiet. She expected Walter to arrive around noon as usual, but he came earlier carrying a small wooden chest. It looked old, older than either of them. "Brought some of my old gear," he said, setting it down gently. "And something else." Emily watched as he opened the chest. Inside was an old photograph, worn and yellowed at the edges. It showed two young men standing beside Liberty Dawn, smiling proudly. "That's me," Walter said, pointing to the taller one. "And that's Jack, my best friend. We built this boat together before I left for Vietnam." Emily studied the photo. "You both look so happy," he nodded. "We were. He never came back from the war." Walter's voice was soft. "Before we shipped out, he made me promise to hide something aboard the boat." "A letter," he said. "I never told anyone about it. After the war, I couldn't bring myself to look for it." Emily's curiosity grew, but she didn't press him. She simply said, "Maybe when we finish fixing her, you'll be ready." Walter gave a quiet smile. "Maybe." Over the next week, they worked harder than ever. Emily sold a few of her belongings to buy fuel and bolts. Walter brought his old compass and navigation tools, saying the boat should remember her direction. The two of them became an unlikely team: a young woman with no money but endless hope, and an old soldier with no family but endless memories. The townsfolk began to notice the change. The boat that once looked like trash now stood gleaming in the sunlight, its hull smooth and painted fresh blue. Kids pointed and smiled. Even the skeptical locals nodded in approval. "Looks like she might float after all," one fisherman said with a grin. On the final day of repairs, Emily climbed onto the deck, brushing away the last specks of sawdust. Walter stood beside her, his hand resting gently on the railing. The boat rocked slightly with the tide. "She's ready," Emily whispered. Walter nodded, but his expression had changed. He looked both proud and distant, like a man standing at the edge of something important. "There's still one thing left," he said quietly. "Something I should have done a long time ago." Emily frowned. "What is it?" He looked at her, eyes full of emotion. "It's time to find that letter." The next morning, Emily reached the dock before sunrise. The sea was calm, like a silver sheet, and the air smelled of salt and new beginnings. Liberty Dawn rested gently against the tide, her fresh blue paint shining softly in the early light. Emily felt proud and nervous. Today, they would test if the old boat could finally float again. But when she saw Walter walking down the dock, she knew something else was on his mind. He moved slower than usual, his cane tapping against the wood with every step. His weathered face looked thoughtful, as if he had been up all night remembering things from long ago. "Morning," Emily greeted him with a smile. "Are you ready for her big day?" Walter nodded. "I've been ready for 40 years, he said quietly. He placed a small envelope on the dock beside her toolbox. It was yellow and fragile, The paper edges curled from time and air. The handwriting on the front had faded, but Emily could still read it. It said, "For Walter Dean." She looked at him with surprise. "You found it?" He nodded. "Hidden under a loose plank in the cabin floor. I didn't expect it to still be there." "Guess Jack knew how to keep secrets." Emily sat beside him. The sound of waves lapped softly against the boat. For a moment, Walter didn't move. His old hands shook slightly as he picked up the envelope. "I've carried guilt for a long time," he said slowly. "I left him behind. I promised him I'd come back and I didn't." "You went to war," Emily said gently. "You did what you had to do." He shook his head. "War takes more than men's lives. It takes their time, their peace, their courage to start again. I came home but never really lived. I built walls, not boats." He looked down at the letter. His eyes filled with tears that refused to fall. "I think Jack wanted me to remember what life was before everything broke." Emily didn't say anything. She just placed her hand gently on his arm, letting him take his time. The sea breeze moved softly between them. Finally, Walter opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded paper yellow with age. The ink had faded but was still readable. He began to read in a trembling voice. "If you're reading this, Walter, it means the sea brought you home. I don't know if I'll make it back, but I want you to promise something. Don't stop living for what we dreamed. Build more boats. Help others float. And if you ever find Liberty Dawn again, remember she carries our friendship and my faith in you. If she sails again, I'll be there with you, brother, in the wind, in the water, and in the calm after the storm." When Walter finished reading, silence filled the air. He stared at the letter, his lips pressed tight. Emily felt tears prick her eyes. There was something sacred about the moment. Two lives meeting through words written decades apart. "Jack always believed I'd build again," Walter whispered. "I guess he was right." Emily smiled softly. "And you did. Together we brought her back." Walter folded the letter carefully and placed it in the chest again. "Thank you, Emily," he said quietly. "You didn't just fix a boat. You helped an old man remember who he used to be." She shook her head. "You helped me too, Walter. I was lost before this. Now, I feel like I have something worth waking up for." They stood together on the dock for a while, just watching the waves shimmer. Then with a deep breath, Walter said, "It's time. Let's see if she still remembers how to sail." Emily nodded, and together they pushed Liberty Dawn gently into the water. The old wooden boat creaked, hesitated, and then, to Emily's joy, settled smoothly, floating steady and balanced. She gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. Walter chuckled softly, a rare sparkle in his eyes. "She floats," Emily whispered. "Told you she would," Walter said, grinning. They climbed aboard, and Emily started the small engine she'd spent days trying to fix. It coughed once, twice, and then roared to life. The smell of fuel mixed with the salt air, and the sound echoed over the quiet bay. A few townsfolk looked up from the pier, cheering and clapping as the boat moved slowly away from shore. Walter took the tiller, his hand firm despite the years. Emily watched him, realizing that this was more than a boat ride for him. It was a farewell, not to her but to the past he had carried for so long. They sailed past the harbor and into open water. The sea stretched endlessly around them, calm and blue. Walter looked out, his eyes shining under the sunlight. "Feels like she's been waiting for me," he said softly. Emily nodded. "And for me too." After a while, Walter reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded letter again. He looked at it for a long time, then held it up to the wind. "Goodbye, Jack," he whispered, and let it go. The paper lifted gently, caught the sea breeze, and drifted away until it disappeared into the horizon. For a long time, they said nothing. The boat rocked gently, the waves whispering beneath them. Emily felt peace, a deep, quiet peace she hadn't felt in years. As the sun began to set, painting the sky gold and orange, Walter turned to her. "When I was your age, I thought the world was too big for me. Then life taught me it's never about how far you go. It's about who you help along the way. You helped me, Emily, more than you know." She smiled through tears. "You helped me too. Maybe we were both meant to find this boat." He chuckled softly. Maybe Jack had something to do with it. They returned to the dock just as the first stars appeared. Walter tied the rope neatly, then stood for a long moment looking at the boat one last time. "She's yours now," he said finally. "Promise me you'll keep her sailing." Emily frowned. What do you mean? He smiled faintly. I'm tired, Emily, but don't worry. It's a good kind of tired. I've done what I needed to do. She tried to convince him to stay for dinner, but he shook his head. I'll see you tomorrow, he said, tapping his cane and slowly walking away into the dusk. Emily watched him until he disappeared behind the row of old boathouses. Something in her heart felt heavy, though she didn't know why. The next morning, when she arrived at the dock, Liberty Dawn glowed in the early sun. But Walter wasn't there. On the railing, taped carefully with a piece of string, was a small brown envelope. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. For Emily, you gave me peace. The boat is yours now. Use her to bring others the same hope you gave me. There's something waiting for you under the seat in the cabin. Walter? Emily rushed into the boat, tears already welling in her eyes. She lifted the seat, and there, wrapped neatly in cloth, was another envelope, thicker this time. Inside it was a check for $50,000 and a folded piece of paper. On it, in Walter's handwriting, were the words, "Dream again." Emily sat down on the deck, unable to stop the tears. She remembered the way Walter had smiled when they first set sail, the way his eyes looked lighter, freer. She realized he must have known this was his final gift, not just to her but to the dream he once shared with his friend. She spent the rest of the day sailing Liberty Dawn alone. The sea was calm and the breeze carried the scent of salt and memory. As she steered the boat, she felt like Walter and Jack were still with her, two old sailors smiling from beyond the horizon. Weeks passed, but Emily didn't let the boat sit still. She started offering free rides for local kids, teaching them how to sail. She told them stories about Walter, about courage, friendship, and how even broken things could rise again. Soon, people from nearby towns came to see Liberty Dawn, the boat that had been brought back from the dead by a young woman and a war veteran. Local newspapers wrote about her story. Donations came in from strangers who were moved by what she had done. A group of veterans even offered to help her build a small dockside workshop, where she could restore more boats with others who needed a second chance, just like she once did. One evening, months later, as Emily sat on the deck watching the sunset, she felt the same peace she had seen in Walter's eyes. The horizon glowed in gold and red, and she could almost hear his voice saying, "Keep her sailing," she whispered softly into the wind. "I will." The next morning, she painted a new name on the side of the boat, Second Chance, and every time she pushed it into the water, the waves seemed to whisper the same words back to her, as if the sea itself remembered.